Chair of the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic media. Richard Nobles, Jonna Norton, Abby Callis,
I'm here.
Jessica Hamilton, Tiffany Johnson,
Here.
Janine Kesterson,
Here.
Rodney McNeil, Zachary Parrott, Doug Wright.
Here.
I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at the meeting today, as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to the meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended, so we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On July 7th, 2022, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material are posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "Request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda.
Thank you. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item that we can on the agenda. So I think since we don't have a quorum at the moment, we can't approve the agenda, but I think I can go ahead and ask David if you would to proceed with the director's report.
Sure, thank you. In your packet of material, you should see a one-page report, and I will just go ahead and summarize some of the items in terms of some recent updates for the BSRB and some of the updates from the last board meeting that took place on July 11th, 2022. In terms of the BSRB updates, we are still under some of the governor's restrictions related to the pandemic in terms of avoiding in-person meetings. And so our advisory committee meetings and most of our board meetings will continue to be held virtually. And we will give you updates if that changes in the near future. We have recently made a new hire for the BSRB. Her name is Emma Allen, and she's a new licensing specialist. She started for the BSRB on July 18th, and she is primarily assisting us with renewals, but we are cross-training her on other areas of licensing in the office. And it's kind of a neat hire, in my opinion. So what we're planning for this new licensing specialist is we're going to cross-train her on different areas of the office. And as work is busy in one area or another, we will move her to different parts of the office. And then if individuals are, become ill or go on vacation, we will be able to move her to those areas. So that way we can continue with things. There's not delays. And then have more flexibility for staff to take vacation and try to improve their quality as employees here too. So we're really excited about having her on board. And if you get the chance to meet her, I think you'll be really impressed by her as well. In terms of some of the other BSRB updates, every year the agency has to submit a budget to the Division of Budget by September 15th. We have a budget that we were working on for fiscal year 2023, which is what we're in right now. That starts on July 1st and goes until June 30th. of the following year. So we're in fiscal year 2023. We will submit a revised budget for 2023, but we will also be submitting brand new budget requests to the legislature for fiscal year 2024 and also fiscal year 2025. So we are currently in the process of scheduling meetings with some of our vendors for IT services and administrative services. We've been having conversations concerning legal services and trying to figure out cost for the agency moving forward for the next 2 years. That will be submitted to the Division of Budget by September 15th. And then in January, the first week, the governor will release the governor's recommendations on all agency budgets. Then the legislature will go through the process of tracking changes and making further adjustments through the spring. So I will let you know when that budget is available for review, but hopefully we can keep it pretty close to what we had previously submitted in the past years. Even though we are facing some inflationary factors with some of our vendors, we're going to try to keep costs low so that way we don't have to consider any potential increases in licensure in the near future. Some updates from the board meeting on July 11th, 2022. By statute, every July, the board elects a new chair and a vice chair. And at the July 11th board meeting, the board elected Mary Jones to serve as the new chair of the board. She is the board member for marriage and family therapy. And the board elected Dave Anderson to serve as vice chair for the board. There are 3 new board members. Board members serve 4-year terms, and the governor can appoint members. And so the governor has appointed 3 new individuals. Cynthia Schindel is the new board member for social work, and she holds the position previously held by Carolyn Safran. Richard Nobles is the new board member for licensed psychology, and he holds the position previously held by Bruce Nystrom. And Jim Kilmartin is the new public member of the board, and he holds the position previously held by Leslie C. Wester. So we are looking forward to working with each of those individuals. We've already started to have meetings with them, and there'll be more meetings to come. One of the items the board took care of at the last board meeting, so there is a subset of the board called the Complaint Review Committee that hears investigations from individuals when we receive complaints against practitioners. And the Complaint Review Committee, or the CRC, is guided by an investigation policy. And so that investigation policy is in the process of being updated and modernized. That policy was last updated, I believe, back in 2009. So we submitted a report for the board to consider possible changes. We went through about the first half of those at the last board meeting. And at the next board meeting on September 12th, we are hopeful the board will be able to get through the remaining potential changes, and then we can post the revised policy on the board's website. The last item from the board meeting is that the board held an all-day planning meeting in previous years. Usually that was off-site from the board's office. We are planning to have the meeting this year on Monday, October 24th, 2022, and that will be in Olathe. And so given when that meeting is scheduled, the advisory committee will have one more date prior to that off-site meeting. So in terms of any recommendations, if the advisory committee does meet at the beginning of October, you would be able to submit recommendations on any proposed legislation to the board for consideration at the offsite meeting on October 24th. And then one last item. So I do try to attend as many of the national conventions as I can to collect information and bring it back to the board in terms of the professions that we oversee. There is an upcoming meeting for professional counselors. And the professional counselor meeting is being held by the National Board for Certified Counselors, NBCC. And that is going to take place August 3rd through August 6th. So I'll be leaving early tomorrow morning to go to Philadelphia for that convention. I'm not only attending that, the convention asked me to be a speaker. So I'll be speaking on the following topic: innovation and licensing, looking forward and back. And you may hear the term innovations and licensing and be wondering, what type of changes is the Bsrb going to be considering? Are there new technological changes? The approach that I'm taking is really more of a creative way of looking at licensing. And so what I'll be talking about are some changes that I'm going to be proposing to the board coming up. For example, the last board meeting, we highlighted a regulation that is independent to the licensed psychology profession. And under that regulation, it allows us to receive requests for additional time to complete continuing education hours. There is a regulation under the licensed psychology regulations for continuing education that says if someone is approaching renewal and they have not completed all of their hours, they can make a request to the BSRB, and if they have good cause for needing an extension, and they can submit a request and have a plan for finishing those hours, and the BSRB can review that. And if approved, they can receive an extension of time up to 6 months. It does not renew their license. It does not extend their license to any additional time, but it does allow them to go through the process of renewing their license so they can keep practicing while they finish those hours. And so, like I said, it's unique to the licensed psychology profession. But this year, as we were approaching the deadline for renewals for licensed psychologists, we went ahead and sent a letter out or an email to anyone who hadn't renewed about a week before the deadline. And we encouraged them that if the pandemic had affected them in a way that they believe they might qualify for that they should request an extended period of time from the BSRB. And we worked with a number of licensed psychologists on that. And through using that regulation and being aggressive about it, we were able to help about 10 to 12 licensed psychologists continue to stay licensed when they would have otherwise retired or let their license lapse and stop practicing. So what we're doing is we're asking all the other advisory committees to discuss that to see if they would like that for their profession as well. Additionally, we're looking at ways that we can support current licensees. The idea is that a lot of the licensing innovation concepts that people are looking at really have a focus towards individuals coming in from the outside. And as part of that process, we have to review their educational materials, their references, and a lot of other supplemental information. And so those reviews take a great deal of time. But if we can continue to support current professionals and assist them in staying licensed, that helps the licensed pool of individuals stay strong, so there's not as much demand for individuals to be coming through the licensure process, and not as much demand for us to consider removing license requirements, which might go against the public protection mission of the board. Additionally, I'll be talking to the board about a concept where we might consider looking at ways to get individuals who let their licenses lapse to provide more of an incentive for them to reactivate and reinstate their license. Some individuals might have stepped away over the years because they wanted to spend more time with their family. Perhaps they had an illness, perhaps there was someone close to them who had an illness, or maybe they were just burned out and ceased practicing for a period of time. But if we can provide an incentive to those individuals to consider coming back to the profession, we know those individuals have already met the standards for licensure once. And I think it would be a good idea for us to take an approach and look at the other side of the licensing equation and provide an incentive, maybe by looking at the reinstatement fee and maybe decreasing that for a temporary period of time and saying for a limited time, we would like everyone to consider coming back and reinstating. One of the other benefits of that is that while it does take a lot of time for individuals to be reviewed on the front end, if individuals are going for reinstatement, that process to bring them back into the profession is much quicker. So there's a lot of benefits from that. And so, so just some ideas we've been talking about here in the office. I've shared it with my staff. I've asked them to start thinking creatively too, if there's ways that we can encourage current licensees to stay licensed, or maybe have individuals reinstate their license. But I thought I would share those with you too. So I'll be talking about those concepts in a little bit more detail, but I'm excited to talk to the individuals at that conference, excited to share some of the information that some of the things that we're working on here at the board. And with that, I'll go ahead and end my presentation, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thanks, David. I have a question. It's kind of a general question. It's kind of a one-off of what you were just talking about as far as, I think it has to do with workforce kinds of issues. In my time with the board, I don't recall us ever sending out a survey to all licensed psychologists, for example, to ask them how many hours of service do you provide per week, right? Because, or a number of different questions. Is there a mechanism? And I know we have their email addresses.
Are you wanting that information for your purposes? KDHE gathers that information. It's on the renewal form.
KDHE.
Department of Health and Environment.
Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, so some of the questions David, that you were asking made me wonder. So if I see, let's pretend for a moment that I see 0 hours worth of clients on an average week, right? So I'm just not doing that. And I'm on the fence about, well, do I let my license expire or do I renew it? It seems like there's a lot of questions that could be answered if we knew a little bit more directly from the license providers. How many clients do you see per week? How many people are on your wait list? How long is your average wait time? It seems like there's a number of questions that kind of go into some of the questions you're addressing, that it might be nice to actually have the numbers.
Mhm. We don't currently have a way to do a survey. There are companies that we have worked with in the past. So SurveyMonkey you can use to do a limited number of questions, but if you try to survey a large group of people, that usually costs a little bit of money for them to organize the information for you. Last fall, the social workers, their advisory committee asked me, and we worked together on a survey for social workers. And we did collect, I think, over 1,000 responses to that survey. Now that survey was focused more on things like supervision and then the issues related to supervision. It did ask about continuing education as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, if they were supportive of that as a profession. But if you are interested in something like a survey for licensed psychologists on some of those topics, that is something that we could work on as an advisory committee and put that together. And I think we would be able to consider that as a survey we could send out to our licensees.
Do we have any data like the age of psychologists who let their license lapse? Do we get a sense, do we have a lot of folks who are just retiring, or are there people that might be earlier in their career that are letting it lapse? Do we have any data like that?
So the short answer is no, that's not something that we've studied. Now, I think that there are ways to get at that. That is something I've just started to research. I think one of the easiest ways, I think, to approach it, and it's not, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but when I was looking at the most recent renewal data, I was looking at how many applications the BSRB had processed over the last year and some information like that. One thing that we could do is we could sort the individuals who did drop off by their license numbers, and that would at least give us an idea how long people had practiced by using those blocks of numbers. And so even we may not know exactly their age, but we would see how many years likely they have practiced, which would give us some indicator probably of their age to a certain extent. But you ask a good question. In terms of some of the other professions too, we don't really know. We have a general idea of how many people let their licenses expire, but we don't know how many of those individuals are individuals who retired, or how many people may have left because they felt burned out. And it may be a combination of factors, so it may not just be one thing, but we don't currently have that information as far as why some of those individuals have stepped away from the profession.
So I typically use Qualtrics when I do surveys for my day job. I don't know how it compares with SurveyMonkey in terms of cost, but it's depending on, I maybe would have to visit with the AGs about this, but I mean, there's no real reason that we couldn't use my account, other than it's my account and not your account, although my account is owned by the state. So anyway, if there's a cost issue, then I think we could create something if we needed to, and maybe get at some of Doug's questions too, right? Because this is it's a workforce issue, right? So if we have a lot of people, I mean, knowing how many licensees we have, we know that, but that doesn't tell us what the capacity for serving the public is, right? I'm licensed, I'm seeing 0. That's just the way it is. And how many of me are there? I don't know the answer to that. And wouldn't that be nice to know?
I think that would be really valuable. And I'll say anecdotally in Topeka, I don't know if I talked about this with this group, but I tried to put together a better referral list recently after COVID, and I was using a pre-COVID referral list, and probably 25% of the people on my known referral list are gone. And some of them, I don't even know where they are. Like there's no out, they're gone.
Just gone.
Yeah. And I think I probably had 30, 35 people on my referral list around the area. It was a large number. I was quite surprised.
Wow. Yeah, that it just seems like that could be there could be some good information to be had out there that would help. I think, David, with your goal of crafting some creative licensing strategies to help keep people or whatever, if we knew.
Yeah, well, and it is interesting because a lot of the pressure right now is on, looking at some really radical changes for licensure, in my opinion, considering, there's some individuals out there who say maybe we shouldn't have a licensure examination. And other people say that perhaps we shouldn't be factoring in things like good moral character or whether someone should merit the public trust. And so it seems like any requirement for licensure, people are saying, how many of these can we strip away? But that goes contrary to our public protection mission as a board. So if it does come down to a workforce type issue in terms of having individuals who are practicing, at least as a short-term measure, it might be worth it to go ahead and reach out to individuals who have stepped away first and say, if it was incentivized that you would come back, because, that reinstatement fee, I think it's in place for a good reason to try to make sure people don't let their licenses lapse. However, when they're on the other side of it, it kind of creates a bit of a wall or a barrier for them to come back and become licensed again. And so that's why we were thinking about maybe doing a short-term decrease in that reinstatement fee and cutting it in half. While you would lose revenue for the BSRB, you wouldn't be receiving that licensure revenue at all if they weren't licensed. And so better to have people come back who had already met the standard once and, invite them to come back again. And in terms of how many hours they would serve, that can vary. So we wouldn't really know about that, but I think it would help the overall number of licensees, at least temporarily.
And as I recall, seems like we still, maybe we weren't running with a surplus, but we still had a fair amount of cash in hand so that we could, and we're not talking about massive numbers of people, reinstating their license, right? It's not going to break the bank. Okay.
No, and at the last meeting, I talked a little bit about, I am planning to give a SciPac update a little bit later, but I think I can talk about a couple of those topics as they relate to this topic in general right now. Because at the last meeting, I was talking a little bit about the renewal process and the impact that SciPac might play on, overall licensee numbers, whether we would see a decrease in the number of licensed psychologists who are licensed in Kansas because of SciPac. So all licensed psychologists, as you know, they renew their licenses in June of even numbered years. And so versus the other professions where someone has a 2-year license from the time that they originally get their license, they have to renew 2 years from the end of that month throughout their career. For licensed psychologists, we really do have sort of a cutoff point where we know what the number of licensees is before that. And then after that point, anyone who lets their license lapse, that's going to happen right then. So at the July board meeting, we did present some information to the board. Going from May of 22 to July of 22, the number of licensed psychologists did drop by 102 licensees. It went from 1,054 to 952. I did a little bit of a deep dive into some of that data to see in what categories some of that decrease was attributable to. So of those 102 that did drop off, 43 of those were Kansas residents. So SciPac really wouldn't affect that because the requirements of SciPac is that you have to maintain a licensed psychology license in your home state. So as long as those were individuals that were residing in Kansas and living in Kansas, Kansas would most likely be their home state. So we did have 43 that dropped off in Kansas. The next highest drop off was pretty surprising because it was actually, I believe, in California. We had 14 individuals drop off from California, which was previously at 26. So our number of licensees from California decreased by half. And I'm not sure why that is, because California is not a SIPAC state. Now I'm not familiar with what they're doing as far as licensure, so there may be something special out there that they have done. But our number of licensees in California dropped in half, basically. In Missouri, it did decrease by 13, and Missouri is a SIPAC state. In Texas, it did drop by 10 from 52 to 50 or 42. But all the rest of the decreases in states was less than 10. It was interesting to look at the different states and licensure that, what individuals live in what states and have a Kansas license. I believe we have licensees in all states except for about 6. So we do have kind of a spread out pool. But one of the interesting things too is that only about 59% of all licensed psychologists are Kansas residents. So about 40% of all licensed psychology residents are out of state. But when you combine Kansas, Missouri, and Texas, then you come up to about 80% of all of our licensees. So really it comes down to those 3 states that make the vast majority of our licensees. But in terms of looking at the licensees and SIPAC, without going person by person, it's really hard to tell why some of these individuals dropped off. We do have some attrition that's normally attributable. We just haven't studied that in the past, so I can't tell you how it compares to past years. I can tell you in looking at a 4-year history that this type of drop is somewhat common because when licensees drop in June of even numbered years, for the next 2 years, they don't drop off. So unless a licensee should pass away or someone must stop practicing because of disciplinary reasons, they're just going to keep building in terms of their license total. So I would expect for the next couple of years, our license total for licensed psychologists would climb. So long story short, we did see some drop in licensure. Thankfully, it was not a dramatic drop in licensure, but part of the reason I think is because we were fairly aggressive trying to reach out to licensees and encouraging them to renew. And like I mentioned earlier, we used that regulation to grant additional time for people to do their continuing education hours. So we were trying to explore creative ways to make sure we didn't have a further decrease in our license pool.
I'm muted. There we go. So the other things on our that we were planning on doing were continuing the discussion on unprofessional conduct. I suppose we could have that conversation, but we couldn't make any recommendations on that. And so it may be worth it to punt that.
Yeah, and Rick, I can give just kind of a brief update on SIPAC too. I did want to touch on SIPAC as it relates to licensing, but we are a member of the compact and we did start January of this year. I'd like to give members of the advisory committee a little update in terms of the number of individuals practicing under SIPAC. So that has kind of stabilized, at least for the moment. There are 2 main ways to practice under the SIPAC commission. You do have to request to practice under the commission, have your materials reviewed, and then be granted authority to practice under the commission. There is an option to do teletherapy, and 51 licensed psychologists in Kansas are currently doing that through the SIPAC Commission's authority. There are 4 individuals who are doing the less popular temporary authority to practice in-person services in states. So combined, we have about 44 licensed psychologists who are doing those, or there may be a little bit of crossover, but less than 60 who are providing those services. There is a new newsletter that in your materials from the SIPAC Commission from July of 22. There are a number of states that have joined with the new legislative session being completed. So now the number of states that have SIPAC memberships are over half. And so that number will probably grow a little bit more. And then I'm not sure that all states will choose to join the compact, but it will probably approach somewhere close to that. There was a meeting recently, a mid-year meeting for the SIPAC Commission. There were a couple of rules that were proposed, And those rules were made open for public comment, and that document with the public comment is posted on the BSRB website as well. So there's a link you can go and provide public comment to look over those rules. The two rules, just as a quick summary, involves fees for the authority to practice interjurisdictional telepsychology, or to practice under the temporary authority authorization to practice the APIT or the TAP. And essentially what Rule 4 and Rule 5 do is they would change some of the rules to allow the SIPAC Commission to charge an annual renewal fee to practice under those different types of authorizations to practice. And so one of the things that was talked about at that meeting is that SIPAC is one of two compacts that does an assessment to the state of Kansas based on the number of individuals who practice under SIPAC authority. So for every licensed psychologist who practices under SIPAC authority, at the end of the year, under the current format, the SIPAC Commission will charge the state of Kansas essentially $10 per person and bill the state of Kansas. And so that's basically the cost of our membership in the SIPAC Commission. There has been resistance from states on that assessment. Like I mentioned, only 2 of the multi-state compacts have that type of charge. And so one of the conversations about this renewal fee was that this is an effort by the SIPAC Commission to pass some of the costs more on the individuals who are practicing under SIPAC to get away from charging the assessment to states. And so they are currently proposing to allow for the annual renewal fee from the individuals who are actually practicing. And so those are open for public comment. I believe any public comments have to be made by September 27th. So feel free to take a look at those on the website. There is a link. Also, as I've mentioned in the past, if any individuals want to know if someone is practicing under SIPAC authority, there is a verification portal that you can click on from the BSRB front page, and you can look up a practitioner, or you can look up a state based on the home states or states where they're licensed. So you can see if someone who's practicing in Kansas is doing so under SIPAC authority. Of course, you can also use the BSRB website to see if someone has a current license under the BSRB, but using our website, you should be able to verify both. And then there was one more item that I thought was kind of interesting. SIPAC sent it around, so I thought I would pass it to you as well. It's just a little one-page handout. Apparently, there is some individual who purports to be practicing under SIPAC Commission authority who has been issuing letters about American service pets. And the SIPAC Commission wanted to clarify that their commission really has nothing to do with service animals. And so it's just a one-page document clarifying that they are not issuing these letters. These are not coming from the SIPAC Commission. But if any individuals receive these letters, they apparently have received several of these from different individuals. And the individual who is providing these letters appears to be practicing under SIPAC authority. So if you have any questions about that, I can look into it further, but it's just a short little announcement that SIPAC wanted to put out to jurisdictions. So I wanted to pass it along to you as well. That's the end of the update on SIPAC.
Thanks, David. Okay, so I think I would like, if we can, just since we don't have a quorum, to go ahead and punt on the unprofessional conduct until we have a quorum. That just doesn't seem like a great use of time to go through that if we can't really do anything. The other thing on our agenda was to talk a little bit about accreditation. I'm happy to give you kind of just an overview, and then we can do with it what the 4 of you want to do, either talk more about it or punt that as well. Is that okay if I just give you I'll give you the elevator talk? So for those of you who may already know this, back in 2007, a new accreditation system came online. It's the PCSAS, I know it has PCSAS. It's the Psychological Clinical Science Accreditation System. So that accreditation system came from the Academy of Clinical psychological clinical science, which saw itself as a way of improving the field by, I'm trying to be balanced here. This is me trying to be balanced. So I'm standing on my head being balanced, trying to improve the field by being more evidence-based and science-based than what they felt like the field had become. And specifically, members of the academy felt that APA specifically had moved away from kind of its scientific roots. So that's me being diplomatic. Many of the what I would consider better clinical psychology programs in the country, certainly the top, actually almost all of the top 25 in the U.S. News and World Reports have joined the academy, and frankly, my program joined the academy too. So full disclosure. However, moving from that academy, many of the universities have started joining this new accreditation system, which is a little different from the APA accreditation system in terms of, I don't know that it's different in terms of rigor, but it's different in terms of how it accomplishes its goals. It is much more flexible. And by flexible, I mean the old APA accreditation system required. So all of us probably in here, you had to have a 3-hour course on biological foundations of behavior, right? That was a must. It had to be a 3-hour course. It had to be taken. PC-SAS does not require that. PC-SAS requires that those, what we used to call broad and general domains, they must be covered, but they can be covered in a variety of ways so long as the students, so as long as the program is able to document that the students are obtaining the knowledge that they need. Okay, so a PC-SAS program might not at all require a class called Biological Foundations of Behavior. Rather, they might require research in that area or anything. It really can be any evaluated educational experience that would allow the students as a whole to gain the knowledge, right? Okay, so that happened. So at the moment, there are a few dozen, maybe 36, maybe it's more than that, really good programs that are PC-SAS accredited. Almost all of them have also maintained their APA accreditation status. That part will not be true for 5 more years. I can tell you, and I could, if David, am I allowed to share my screen? Is that
Let me take a look. Yes, you can do that.
okay? I was making sure it was not a violation of something, but okay.
Nope, should be fine.
Great. Let me share my screen, and there we go. And then pop up with that. So the accredited programs, and if you look at them, I mean, you'll recognize these are not fly-by-night programs. These are good programs, right? We got Arizona State, Binghamton, Boston, Duke, Emory, Harvard, Indiana, McGill, Michigan State. Oklahoma State is our closest neighbor, right? So 5 hours south. I can tell you that many of you know that I just stepped down as director of the clinical child psychology program. These are our peers, right? These are who we fight with for students. The director who replaced me is probably going to get PC-SAS accredited. I don't believe it's necessary. I'll go ahead and say that publicly, but it's going to happen, right? So we're going to have a lot of these programs. I hope that many of them will continue to maintain APA accreditation, but I suspect that they will not. And I know for a fact that I know the training directors, and I know which training directors in here are not going to maintain APA accreditation. Now, why do I care, right? I care because when we look at our regulation for educational requirements, the educational requirements state that if at the time the applicant graduated from the program, this doctoral degree program was accredited by the APA, they just kind of go through, right? That's the standard. If they're not, then here's the criteria, and that's what someone has to review if someone comes from a non-APA accredited program. There's two reasons this is important. One is that there could be people coming from excellent programs that are not APA accredited, that are PCSAS accredited, or for that matter, the Canadian Psychological Association has excellent standards too. Those people will not be able to be licensed using this regulation. So if I go to the University of North Carolina today or next year, and they drop APA, a student from that program will not have taken 3 hours of whatever the class happens to be, right? Because our regulation specifically says, just like APA used to say, and there's a second part to this, APA accreditation used to say, you must take 3 hours of biological aspects of behavior, 3 hours of cognitive and affective, 3 hours of social, 3 hours, right? And state of Kansas adopted that, right? That's been the way it's been for, well, since the Boulder model, so 1954, right? That's the way it's been. PCSAS changed that, and here's the kicker, APA no longer requires that. My program, so that changed for the APA programs, following what that's why I'm talking about PCSAS. That accreditation system put pressure on APA to be more flexible. So now an accredited program in APA no longer requires us to do 3 hours of all of these, what used to be called broad and general areas, right? My program, instead of making you take 3 hours of bio foundations, as long as I have provided some means for you to gain that knowledge, you don't have to have taken 3 hours. Does that make sense? So what we have here now is regulations that reflect the way APA accreditation was prior to 2016. So moving forward, right, our regulations don't really hold people from non-accredited programs. They don't hold them to the same standard that APA holds, and they don't hold them to the same standard that PCSAS now holds. So we got a little bit of an issue. I'm going to stop for a second and get a little sip of my water here. And anybody has a question, this would be a great time to ask, and take a long time asking because my throat's sore.
Okay, Rick, I don't know if it's as much of a question as just agreement that obviously we're going to have to make some changes. We can't hold prospective licensees to a standard that doesn't exist any longer by APA standards if they've changed that. But also we have to recognize there are other accrediting bodies. Now I know it allows for that, but it's almost like if you're not APA, it's a higher standard then, and that
Right.
Exactly.
Can't be
either.
Right. So if you're from the Canadian Psychological Association, and maybe that doesn't, I don't know, maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. But if you're PCSAS, it's probably just as good of a program as an APA accredited program. And yet we're going to hold you to the 1954 through 2016 standards.
Yeah, I would second what Doug said. There's definitely two issues. The first being that we're holding them to a non-existent APA standard. My second thing that I noticed was when you were listing the schools, I saw University of Michigan. I have an intern from the University of Michigan every couple of years. And those are people that we try to maintain in our state. And so they're not going to want to come here as a student if they know they can't be licensed here when they're done.
Right.
So,
Right. And so, as long as Michigan maintains their dual accreditation, which as a training director, I can tell you, you'd really have to have a severe self-loathing to do that. And so I know all of these people have moved to PCSAS. They're keeping their other one just until the dam breaks. And it's going to be kind of like SIPAC, right? People are resistant to do it. They're resistant to do it. And then once a handful of states do it, boom. And I think that's what's going to happen, unfortunately, with APA and PCSAS. Now,
it'll be interesting too, because in the APIC match system, that stuff all specifies APA accreditation. Like the applications say your program is APA accredited, your program is Canadian CAS, I think, for the Canadian, or CPA. I can't remember what their acronym is, but those are the only two questions that are on there.
They're going to start doing PCSAS.
Interesting. Okay.
PCSAS is in APIC is this is going to make it sound ugly, but PCSAS is in bed with APIC. I mean, they've got the amount of overlap there is in those organizations right now is really big, and it makes sense.
Know that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at think about who's on APIC, right? It's gonna be the people at these excellent universities, right?
And Rick, I'm just going to pause for a second. I did hear a beep on the conference call. If there's someone on the conference call, go ahead and introduce yourself. I thought I heard someone log in on the conference call. So if you're on the conference call, go ahead and say your name. Okay. They must have logged off, but I just wanted to check and see if someone had entered the meeting. So,
yeah. Now, the good news is that, let me see if I can pull this up real quick. Texas has begun to address this. I can't remember, I'm gonna have to look back and see what page it is. It's actually page 84. So if I can get down there, let's see, where are we? 84. Okay. So Texas rules have broadened to allow CPA and PCSAS as on equal footing with APA, which wouldn't be a terribly difficult change to make with our regulations, right? But the other thing that they have done around this hours situation, I thought I had it highlighted. There we go. So they also note some specific requirements, right? So they have hours, they list hours that we would recognize, but then they note it is recognized that educational institutes vary in their definition of full-time graduate students. It is also recognized, this is for residency requirements. So that's another, yeah. Okay. This is the part that relates to the broad and general. Applicant must demonstrate competence in each of the following substantive areas. Again, that would be what we used in APA's old language would be the broad and general requirements. Competence standards, they got to have a B, minimum of 6 semester hours in each of the 4 content areas, but it is recognized that some doctoral programs have developed special competency examinations in lieu of requiring students to complete coursework in all core areas. That is straight out of the new APA requirements and the PCSAS requirements. And then they go on, graduates of such programs who have not completed the necessary semester hours in these core areas must submit to the council evidence of competency. And so theoretically, the student would then have to say, my program doesn't require 3 hours or 6 hours in ethics, but I passed the ethics competency that my training program required. So that's what Texas is doing. And again, then everything else kind of stays the same. They still have cognitive or biological bases, cognitive, affective, social, individual differences, all of those things that we've got in ours, but it just recognizes that it may not be, this competency may not be gleaned from taking a 3-hour class. It might be something else. I think that's the quick version of my little story here. What questions, what did I not cover that's
I don't know that there's anything you didn't cover. I'll say I appreciated that.
Well, it's a little bit frustrating for me because I don't necessarily agree that PCSAS was necessary. I have mixed feelings about that. Those are all great programs, and I respect what they're trying to do to the extent that they're trying to be better, right? I think we should all be trying to be better. I think the way they have done it has maybe created some, I don't know. I'm not certain that going outside and creating a new thing was better than working from within to improve what we already had. And I feel like that's where maybe we failed ourselves. I don't know. So I don't know if it's something that we'll want to, I mean, this may not be for this next legislative session. We obviously can't decide that today. I don't know that we'll be able to decide that in October before the retreat, but it would probably be good if the board, if we made a recommendation to the board sometime in the spring to start working on this before, I think we have a little bit of time before, it starts being a problem, right? So most of the programs that are PCSAS accredited and APA accredited will maintain both for a period of time, right? So I would have to do a cross check to see, okay, well, North Carolina is, PCSAS accredited and their APA accreditation continues until 2025. It's knowable, but I don't know that it would be practical to try to figure that out. But I think we're in a window that, yeah, we've got a little bit of time, maybe 2 years, maybe 3, before this starts being a headache for the people in the office.
When did PCSAS start?
When did PCSAS start?
Yeah, like what was the first year of accreditation?
It was incorporated as an accredited body in 2007. And I believe the first program was accredited in like 2008.
Okay.
And then for a long time, it was a handful of them, right? And it was Arizona State, it was North Carolina, it was Stony Brook, 1 or 2 others, and
Okay.
for a long time. And so, we'd go to the training directors, go to Cud Cup, and there was, always that group. And, I'm friends with them. I know the guy down at Arizona State. And then slowly through Cud Cup, they started building, the number of people who were interested in this. At Cud Cup, they started having workshops on how to get PCSAS accredited. The board became mostly PCSAS program members. And then once Cud Cup became mostly PCSAS, they started getting people on the APIC board.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been interesting to watch.
Yeah, very much so. Well, it's longer than I remember you introducing this one time before, but it feels like very old, and it must not have been. But those original schools, I imagine they are very much ready to drop APA because they've been doing dual for a long time then.
Yeah, they have been. And it'll be I suspect, I expect it won't be much time at all.
Rick, I really appreciate you bringing this forward. I've just started doing a little bit of research on this topic, and I'll definitely be digging in to try to collect a little bit of information in terms of what licensing boards in other states are doing on this subject. Just on some initial research, it looks like there's a handful of states, at least, that are maybe considering allowing one or the other, where it comes down to PC, SAS, or APA. And I definitely want to double check this to verify that this is true, but I'm seeing some initial news that potentially New York, Illinois, Delaware, and New Mexico potentially might allow for both. And then some states that may not recognize an official accrediting body. But this is definitely an interesting topic on both fronts too. I mean, one thing we've been talking a little bit about under another profession, professional counselors, is looking at the requirements that we have in our regulation. And at one point, those more closely aligned with what their accrediting body, CACREP, recognizes. For example, the online programs. It used to be several years in the past that online programs were not accredited by CACREP, and now CACREP has started accrediting online programs. And so accrediting bodies standards change over time. And I think it's responsible for us to go ahead and continue to look at our regulations and make sure that if we're recognizing an accrediting body, we should look at their standards and what they change over time. So appreciate you bringing both of these topics further. The PC SAS I'm not familiar with, but I'll definitely do some research on that in the future. And I think it is worth us going through and looking at what are the standards and the regulation as it related to the previous APA accreditation as well.
Yeah, I think the best, in the materials you've got, I think I sent the new standards of accreditation, which are actually very similar to PC SAS. So like Abby said, it's really not even if there was no PC SAS, we would need to make some changes because APA doesn't look like this anymore. And it's I think the intent there was to be responsive, to create more flexibility for graduate programs, but I hope we haven't lost something though. Okay, well, I don't know that we can do any other business, can we? Are we stuck?
Well, I was hoping that was maybe Rodney, who came in on the conference call, but no one introduced themselves in the conference call, and we currently don't have enough members to take official action as a body tonight. So I don't have any other topics that I had listed on the agenda, but appreciate your comments on this, and I appreciate the research that you've done. We have these materials posted on the board's website too, so if there's individuals that are watching this meeting, they can definitely review that information and provide feedback to us too if they want to send me an email. So
yeah. Okay, I'm going to quit sharing. Here we go. Well, with that, since we don't have a quorum, there's no way to make a motion to adjourn. So we just, unless there's any other comments or thoughts, or Tiffany or Janine, any thoughts?
Are we meeting in October? Do we know that yet?
Oh,
so
I'm free on the 11th, I think. Yes, I'm free on the 11th.
yeah,
Worked for me too.
traditionally this advisory committee had met the second Tuesday of each month at 6 p.m. So that's the placeholder date that's on the agenda. So.
Okay. So maybe we can just send out a confirmation on that one, and hopefully people will be done with all the things that are keeping them from being here tonight. So.
And Rick, one thing I did want to mention too, we didn't talk about the unprofessional conduct regulations, but you mentioned earlier, I think we are close to finishing a review of that section. So I think in one more meeting, we could probably finish that review.
I agree. Yeah, we've just got to go K through P, and some of them, in my view, look pretty straightforward. So,
Yeah, and one of the items, and I forget if this was provided previously, but at least it's in this group of materials, were the guidelines for the practice of telepsychology.
Mhm.
So if members didn't have a chance to go through that, it would be good to go ahead and read through that for the next meeting as well. Those were from December of 2013, but I think there's a lot of good information in that document.
yeah, they're good. It's good information. There is an open call right now for comments about revising those. So I know that APA is, I guess there's a task force. I'm not involved with that, but there may be a task force, and they're going to start looking at potential revisions to the 2013 practice guidelines. So, okay. Well, with that, I guess we can just have a little time back and just not go outside and be hot, because it's hot out there.
Sounds good. See you all later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take care. Thank you all. Thanks, David.
Night.
Thanks, Leslie.